Hi, my name is Alice. I'm 21 years old. Have you ever felt that your fears are not taken seriously? Do they laugh, tell you to let it go, or take it easy? I've been there. Watch this video to the end, and you will find out how I almost boiled myself alive for fear of germs. I was suspicious and anxious since childhood, and this was a favorite cause for worry in my family. My fears just strained everyone, and my friends just made fun of it all. So I honestly didn't have many friends. I started dating with my friend when I was sure he wouldn't give me an unwashed apple for a joke. I was a terrible hypochondriac then, and I always was afraid of catching something. I learned that he never forgot to take antibacterial wipes with him, and I realized this was my hero. The main problem started with the usual seasonal cold. Several of my friends got sick at once, and then they treated complications for a long time. And I always followed hygiene and immediately thought, of course, I'm clean. Now, can you make a joke about me wiping my phone with napkins? My parents laughed at me and took it as a quirk. Family friends sometimes jokingly suggested that I buy more soap myself and replenish the family's supplies. Some friends, noticing my problem, began to reason with me. They explained that washing hands so often, you wash away the natural protection of the skin. But they were no doctors or specialists. When my parents sided with the advisors, we had our first serious argument. I searched the internet, but there I found only proofs of my rightness. I did not believe the articles that contradicted me. They were not convincing enough. You probably don't believe everything that is written on the internet, do you? In those days, I still managed to control myself. I just constantly felt like I didn't wash my hands well enough. I started thinking, just because I washed my hands didn't mean that everything was okay. But what about the rest of the arm? Because there could also be some kind of infection and it would easily move to a clean one. I started washing my forearms and carried paper towels and wet wipes to class. I asked to go to the bathroom right during class to wash my hands. My hands began to become inflamed, then dry and crack. I kept washing them, then drying them, then washing them, wiping them just in case, and then washing them again. I came earlier for half an hour to any place. To college, to a part time job, to a cafe, I needed to wipe everything down with antiseptic. The journey from home to college took a long time. I couldn't walk into public transport and take hold of a handrail. It seemed to me that everything was covered with germs. I decided to take hold of all handrails with wet wipes. Sometimes I couldn't get on a subway at all, and then my boyfriend would have to give me a ride. My parents sounded the alarm when I decided to take a year off and slow things down with part time work and one very promising internship. I didn't want to go to a therapist. It seemed to me that my family was exaggerating, and it was simple enough to listen to me and better wash all the door handles. Then I would calm down and be able to study and lead a normal life again. My parents were worried and prohibited me to wash my hands. I even listened to them for a while, but my condition returned to panic attacks due to the fact that the sheet on the bed was already lying the second day, and there was probably a lot of germs. I tried not to pay attention to my fears and soothe myself with careful cleaning. Until one day on TV, they showed a story about the Middle Ages, the plague, and the rats. I so vividly imagined all this dirt and unsanitary conditions, cockroaches, bed bugs, that I just didn't remember what happened next. I came to my senses in the bathroom where I scratched my hands into blood. My parents were scared and demanded that I go to the doctor, but at the same time, I thought they were just making fun of me. They saw for themselves what horrors began because people did not wash their hands enough. I got into a fight with them, threw some things in my bag, and ran off to live with my boyfriend. My boyfriend supported me. We talked and decided that there was nothing wrong with cleanliness. While he did not represent the full scale of my problem, He had never lived with me before, and he had never seen me shaking from dirty cup and having to wash it with my own hands. And I didn't show him my scratches. Yes, I was lying to him. What would you do if you were me? My life was just getting better. I spent 2 days in turtlenecks in the heat and went to the grocery store while my boyfriend was gone. I wore disposable gloves to touch door handles, money, and other things that I thought were most dangerous. Everything was fine. We were happy. And then I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, gasping for breath. I thought it was a panic attack. I suddenly realized that we were lying next to each other. Each of us had a lot of bacteria, and we exchanged all this when we kissed, and not only... I ran to the bathroom. The plan matured instantly. I took water, brought all the detergents that were at home, and began randomly pouring them into the water. No damn microbe would have survived in a cocktail like this. My boyfriend pulled me out of the water when I was almost in it. My skin was peeling from the chemical burn, but he didn't swear or panic. I decided that if I was overreacting, it was only a little. A couple of days later, a friend of mine appeared. I had already stopped communicating with many people because of taunts and hints to go to the doctor, but then she asked to accompany her to a doctor. I agreed. After all, disagreements in the cleanliness of a table in a cafe were not a reason to ruin a friendship. My boyfriend offered to give us a ride. When we arrived, it turned out that we had an appointment with a psychotherapist and that I was the patient here, and they had done the whole plan behind my back. I was terribly upset. I got into a fight with them. My friends screamed that they wanted the best, and I didn't want to listen to anything. My boyfriend got down on his knees right in the middle of the corridor and promised to propose to me if I went to a therapist right now. My friend burst into tears, and for some reason, I started laughing. Security came running, and we tried to convince everyone that everything was all right. Of course, we didn't look like people who had everything in order. By some miracle, they assured me that once we arrived, there would be no harm in one visit, especially if everything was all right with me. I would just prove to everyone. I thought that since everyone was so eager to send me to treatment, I would go in and find out that I was all right. The therapist readily agreed with me. We decided that germs were a serious problem. I decided that common sense trumped over medieval disregard for hygiene, and we agreed to meet in a week's time. At home, I began to argue with my boyfriend. I told him that he had thought I was crazy and tricked me into going to the hospital. I was fine, and even the therapist agreed with me. He didn't say anything to me and left the house. I was left alone and furiously scrubbed the entire apartment with bleach. I knew there were germs everywhere. I washed and washed until I remembered that I had already washed the floors this morning. I realized I was doing this for the second time that day. I saw my hands. They were red, and no gloves had helped. I had burns on my palms from some cleaning products I had poured into the bathroom. I saw it all, sat down on the wet floor, and burst into tears. I was shaking and sick with hysteria, and I was howling so hard I couldn't speak. For the first time in months, I was afraid of myself and what might happen next. How soon would I decide that I needed to take off and wash my skin or drink a pipe cleaner to kill the germs inside? It was awful. In the end, I agreed to see a therapist. After that, I made up with my parents, and my friend helped me move things to my boyfriend's. I decided that I would return to university as soon as I finished therapy. Wipes are still the best invention of mankind, but now I use them less and less and only take a shower once a day. I'm glad my problem was taken seriously when even I refused to admit it, and I try to be sensitive to the other people around me. After all, who knows what kind of bats can live in Belfry? Did you like this story? Put a like, and YouTube will show it to other viewers. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss new videos. And don't forget to be friends with your bats.
I stood on the bridge and asked passersby for money, telling everyone that I had cockroaches under my skin and that I urgently needed treatment. Passersby were easily sold on my fake blisters, but suddenly a strange woman in a dark raincoat grabbed my arm. I was pathetically making a learned speech about blisters, but she picked one off with her fingernail and glared at me. I tried to pull away, but she grabbed my arm with her claws and said with a hoarse voice that I was a liar and I would be damned. She blew some powder into my face from the palm of her hand, and when I rubbed my eyes, she was nowhere to be found. The next morning, I woke up with an itch on my neck. I began to scratch it, and suddenly, it seemed to me that something crawled under the skin. But I immediately dismissed these thoughts. I probably got too used to the role. I used to work as an actress in the theater, but it brought a penny. But I figured out how to use my acting talent, and now I was a top-notch con artist. Even though my mother always taught me to be honest, it made me angry. She was sick, and we couldn't even afford the doctor. I tried to save her, but in the end, she died right in my arms. The doctors only tried to get more money. They didn't care. At that moment, I was completely disappointed in people. Our house was taken away for debt, and after that, I decided that from this day on, I would treat people the same way they treated me and my mother. I would deceive them, and soon I would take all their dishonest money, which they loved so much. This would be my revenge for my mother's death. Thinking about it, I quickly packed up and headed for the hospital. There were always a lot of compassionate relatives, and I could always collect a good jackpot from it. But I didn't even stand outside the hospital for 5 minutes. The body itched terribly and there was a feeling that someone was crawling under the skin. Terrified, I ran into the hospital. Help me, there's something moving under my skin. Patients parted, and some nurse said that with such problems, I needed to pay for an appointment with a skin doctor. I immediately put the money on the reception desk. The look in her eyes said, "Where did a beggar get so much money?" The tests took half a day, but in the end, the doctor said I was fine. Are you kidding me? I immediately got up and left the office, slamming the door behind me. I could feel something crawling under my skin, like it was eating me from the inside out. I couldn't work anymore, so I went home. I was hoping that if I got some sleep, it would go away. But just as I lay on my back, it was like I was burned. I jumped up and looked in the mirror. My back was all red. What's going on? And suddenly I remembered yesterday's gloomy woman. What if she really put a curse on me? I ran to the bridge where I begged and searched for the witch for several hours without success. I wanted her to take it all back. When I was exhausted, I decided to take a break in a cafe, and as soon as I went in, I saw the same woman behind the counter. She sipped her coffee calmly. "Well, I'm going to get you." I started to demand that she take back her curse, but the old woman coldly ordered me to sit down. "I'm the hereditary witch Graham, and you've got yourself in trouble. In a week, the cockroaches under your skin will eat you," she said. What was I supposed to do now? Then the witch added that of course she could help me, but in exchange, I had to do everything she said for 3 days. I was indignant. No way! But then I felt something move under the skin on my back again. I was so terrified. I had no choice but to agree. After that, a satisfied Graham stood up and told me to follow her. We came to the outskirts to her dilapidated house. I followed Graham cautiously, and she immediately grabbed my arm and dragged me into the basement. I tried to resist, but she pushed me into the darkness and slammed the door. I banged on it and even tried to pretend that I was suffocating from claustrophobia. But Graham didn't fall for it. Suddenly, something rustled in the corner. I asked in horror, "Who's here?" A huge fat hand came out of the darkness. At that moment, Graham, through the door, told me to strangle this hand immediately. What? It's a living thing. Then Graham slyly remarked that I had promised her that I would do anything if I wanted to be cured. She paused, and I looked at the poor hand and held out my trembling hands. But at that moment, something moved on the floor and began to approach me. And I saw hordes of cockroaches. They began to crawl out of woodwork. I ran and started pounding on the door. I felt like they were really climbing up my legs. But at last, the door opened, and I, not understanding anything, flew out of this damned house and ran as fast as I could. I went home and tried to forget everything. Maybe it was just a bad dream. I tried to calm down, but at night, it seemed to me that cockroaches were crawling under my skin. I couldn't even close my eyes. It seemed I was starting to go crazy. Barely waiting for the morning, I crawled exhausted to Graham's house and began to knock on the door. Graham opened it, but as soon as she saw me on the threshold, she was about to slam the door. I got down on my knees and begged her to take the curse off me, and I even started crying. But Graham dryly ordered me to drop the act and said that she would give me another chance, but she demanded all my money for it. I was ready to do anything. I was bitter, but I took the phone and immediately transferred everything from my card to her and pulled out everything that was in my pockets. Graham smiled haughtily and told me to go to the cemetery at night and dig up a skeleton hand from the oldest grave. I wanted to ask how I could find a grave, but Graham slammed the door on me. It was getting dark and I was afraid to go to the cemetery, but I had to pull myself together. I need to break the curse or I'll just go crazy. The cemetery was dead silent. I carefully lit my way with a flashlight and moved along the path with a shovel. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. My heart sank and I hid behind some tombstone. These were steps. The sound was getting closer. With horror, I looked out and immediately exhaled. It was the watchman who was inspecting the territory. I waited until he was out of sight. Where was this ancient grave? The oppressive silence was unbearable. Just yesterday, I was fooling people with ease and fun, and today, I was without money, in a cemetery, and with cockroaches under my skin. Then I carefully looked at the tombstone behind which I was hiding. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the tombstone, and damn, the 17th century, the most ancient grave. I started digging it up. Suddenly, someone put a cold hand on my shoulder. I screamed and ran as fast as I could. I ran to the witch in the early morning. My skin itched even more, and I could hardly breathe. Graham saw that I came without the skeleton's hand and said in disappointment, "One day left. You won't make it. The cockroaches will eat you." And then it just poured out. I can't remember the last time I cried like that. But the witch told me not to scream. She gave me one last chance. I needed to take the pendant from one evil witch, Terry, who had the audacity to rob Graham. There was no choice. I didn't even ask anything. The cockroaches were just crawling under my skin. Where to go? I asked. At least the witch Terry lived nearby, and I went straight to her house. I carefully walked over to the partially open window and peered inside. That old Terry was snoring on the bed, surrounded by a lot of cats. God, how fat and disgusting she was. Graham said the pendant was hidden in the dressing room next to her bedroom. My heart was pounding. The main thing was not to get caught. I carefully climbed through the window into the bedroom. As I went down, the floor creaked treacherously, and then Terry stared in her bed. Was she awake? But no, Terry just turned over on the other side. I walked around a couple of cats and crept into the dressing room, where there were a lot of boxes and chests. Where was the pendant? I began quietly rummaging through the witch's junk. I finally found it, hanging on the altar by the mirror. The pendant was made of pure gold and shaped like a skull, with huge diamonds in its eyes. I put it in my pocket. Got it. I was about to leave the dressing room when I heard the cat's loud scream. I stepped on the tail of one of them. I immediately ran down to the hall to the front door. I had my hand on the handle. But then the old woman screamed, and she pushed me, and I hit my forehead right on the door with all my strength. And then everything was a blur. I woke up because the policeman was patting my cheeks. I looked around, and Terry was standing there, looking sullen and disheveled. I immediately backed away from her, begged her not to cast a spell on me, and told her about Graham's curse. The cops looked at me like I was a psychopath, and Terry said I was a liar, and that Graham, her sister, con artist, had just dispatched me. She was wanted, and it was not the first time she tried to steal this pendant, because it was very expensive and was inherited by Terry from their grandmother. Terry asked the cops to take me to the station as Graham's accomplice. I swore I didn't know anything, but the cops grabbed me away and took me away. I sat in the cell and grieved. So Graham wasn't a witch, and I, a first-class fraudster, was a victim of a scam myself. I almost cried. Was I really going to jail? And the cockroaches did not go anywhere. The whole body itched terribly. Suddenly, Graham was brought into the cell in handcuffs. The guard wanted to slam the door, but Graham snapped her fingers in his face. His eyes glared over, and he immediately removed the handcuffs first from Graham and then from me, and just turned his face to the wall. Graham was about to make a dash for the exit, but I caught her and pinned her against the bars. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me how to get the cockroaches out from under my skin." Then Graham laughed. She just wanted to teach a cheeky young con artist like me a lesson, and there were no cockroaches. It was just an allergy to the powder she blew in my face, and the usual allergy pills would quickly remove the itch. So I was not sick. I was about to tear Graham apart on the spot, but then I heard voices. The police were approaching. Graham tugged at my sleeve and dragged me out of the station. Graham and I ran out and disappeared, and when we stopped, I asked why the guard had let us go. She said she was a hypnotist, and it worked with the guard. Then Graham said that she liked me and offered to run away from the city to cheat with her. We would make a lot of money together and we would live like queens. Graham offered everything I'd wanted for so long, but then, seeing her hands scratched till they bled, I remember how I had lived in fear these days. An image of my mom popped into my head. She wanted me to be a happy and honest person, and this was what the fraud led to me. I turned and left without answering Graham. I had a new life ahead of me, though not an easy one, but an honest one. Right, Mom? Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. I went on stage in the auditorium dressed as a ghost to get revenge on my killer, Mark. He was practicing on the piano that day. I touched his shoulder. "Why did you kill me?" He turned around and when he saw me, he fainted. What the hell was I supposed to do now? He didn't wake up. I didn't think it would end like this. It all started from the day when the school announced the reporting concert. It should bring together the best musicians of the country. Wow. They would choose one student who would enter the Academy of Music without exams, and it would definitely be me. Then I would finally move out from my parents who punished me even for one beat in solfeggio. The only time they didn't yell at me was during my peanut allergy attacks. I even learned how to use it. It was a way to avoid punishment somehow. And always carried a couple of nuts with me just in case. The music teacher's voice distracted me. Meet the new guy, Mark. He's a brilliant pianist. What? What Mark? I turned around and saw a tall, curly-haired guy standing in front of me. I pretended to be pleased to meet him, and then the teacher added, "Mark will be performing at the reporting concert." What about me? This new guy wanted to take my place? Then the teacher offered to solve everything honestly, prepare the performances, and tomorrow I will choose who will play at the concert, all day at school. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What would I tell my parents? They would blow me up. And so, when they came back to pick me up after school, I hesitantly said that there was another pianist in the class. And tomorrow, the teacher would choose which of us would go to the concert. But my parents shouted why a novice bypassed me so easily. It seemed to me that Dad even swung. Wait, it's not my fault. Something had to be done about it. And then I remembered that I had peanuts in my pocket, especially for such cases. I quickly swallowed the nut and in the same second, my face swelled up. My mom, in a panic, dragged me into the air. It worked. At that moment, Mark was passing by the parking lot. Heck. I didn't want that creep to see me like this. But this upstart just looked at us. He also ironically asked what was wrong with me. Mom replied that it was all because of the peanuts apparently. I had eaten something wrong at school. Mark snorted angrily and I just got in the car quickly. Don't laugh at me. At home, I spent the whole evening thinking about how to get around this creep at the concert, and by morning, I was determined. Mark had no chance. I would perform better, and I would go to the music academy for my crazy parents. I was walking down the school hallway when I heard Mark's voice from the staff room. He shyly asked to play with a notebook today, as he had not yet learned the notes. How pathetic he was. But suddenly I had an idea. If I stole his notebook, Mark wouldn't be able to play. I ran to the dressing room. Mark's briefcase and notebook were probably there. I slipped into the dressing room and looked around, but at the same moment, footsteps were heard outside the door. Damn it. Then Mark came into the dressing room. He looked at me incredulously and asked me what I was doing there, gritting my teeth. I lied about wanting to wish him luck. Mark shrugged and reached for the backpack in his locker. And at that moment, I hugged him. Mark, it's it's going to work. And while Mark was muttering in confusion, I definitely took the sheet music out of his backpack. Now let's look at your talent. I quickly went to the gym. I couldn't wait to see Mark disgrace himself. He sat down at the piano and started to look for his notebook in his backpack. But of course, he found nothing. This was hilarious. Then Mark got up and said he couldn't play tonight. And then he went backstage. Ha! Did I win so easily? My performance, of course, was flawless. The teacher congratulated me on my victory. The place at the concert was mine. Suddenly, Mark called me backstage and said he had something for me. A prize for the one who beat him in a fair fight. Unexpected. Mark immediately handed me a large chocolate cream cake. He said he wanted to please himself with it if he won. But now it was mine. The cake looked so delicious that I immediately took a bite, and in the same second, my face began to swell. Were there peanuts in there? How could you, Mark? It was getting dark in my eyes. This had never happened to me before. Apparently, there were too many nuts in the cakes. My legs gave way and the teacher immediately ran up to me. The last thing I heard was him saying that if I didn't get better, Mark would have to perform in my place. And I blacked out. I came to my senses in the hospital. My parents were standing next to my bed, furious. They scolded me for eating that stupid cake. I could forget about playing the piano in the near future. When my parents left the room, tears were already welling up in my eyes. Now they wouldn't take me to the academy, and I wouldn't move out of my parents' house. My slavery would be eternal. I had to somehow force this scoundrel to abandon the performance. I needed dirt. I immediately reached for the phone and studied Mark's Facebook page. He often reposted creepy ghost stories on his wall, so he believed in them. And so he was afraid of them. Stop. I could try to pretend that I died in the hospital after his trick with the cake. I would pretend to be a ghost. I would haunt Mark. And then I would tell him that if he wanted to live, he would have to give up performing. He didn't see any other way out, so I immediately rushed to the doctors. I tearfully asked them to let me out of the hospital. I really needed to play at the concert. The head doctor agreed, despite the fact that I still didn't look well. I promised that I would stay at home, but I immediately went to school, and in the first lesson, I snuck into the men's room. There I wrote in red lipstick on the mirror, "Mark, give up." After that, I hid and waited for Mark to come in here. I watched his reaction, but Mark just laughed. I needed another plan. Then I decided that I would really scare him. At night, I would climb into Mark's house in a ghost costume and shout that he had to give up the concert. Let him know that the ghosts didn't want to mess with him. So after school, I followed Mark to his house. The road seemed endless. How far away he lived, not like me. In 2 hours, we reached the poorest part of the city. Mark walked over to the house, which looked more like a barn. Did he live here? I couldn't believe it. As soon as Mark was inside, I peeked cautiously through the window. It was full of children in rags. And I complained about my folks. It looked like Mark's life was even worse. I was so eager to get a better look at the shack that I didn't notice when I stepped on a plastic bottle. There was a crunch. I hoped they didn't hear me. And then a man in the room became suspicious and said that he had heard about a thief who was in the area. It was Mark's father. He added that now he would have to stay up until morning and guard the house. Heck, I could imagine listening to my parents' reproaches for the rest of my life if I didn't go to the academy, and the chill ran down my spine. So I decided to go straight to the general rehearsal. Tomorrow, this was my last chance. In the morning, I powdered my face white and even ate a piece of peanut to get puffy again. Now I looked like a ghost. I hid behind the scenes and was waiting for Mark. Here he was, finally. It was now or never. I crept up behind him while he was busy playing. I even listened for a few seconds, but then I remembered why I had come. And I hissed, "Mark, why did you kill me?" As soon as he saw me, Mark turned white and fell to the floor. Panic gripped me as I knelt down and tried to bring him to his senses. "Wake up! I'm all right! I'm alive!" At that, Mark opened his eyes a crack and immediately jumped to his feet. How glad I was! But he only shouted, "Take your place, just don't come any closer," and ran out of the hall. In the morning, I immediately ran to the music teacher's office. I had just been discharged and I was ready to perform. The teacher was glad that I recovered so quickly because the concert was on the verge of failure. It turned out that Mark's parents took his documents from school last night. They were tired of spending money on such nonsense as music. The concert was his last chance to prove that Mark was worth something. But at the last moment, Mark refused to play. Now he will be transferred to a school at a local factory, which is a pity, because he is a great pianist. The teacher finished. Suddenly I felt very ashamed. Mark was a great player, even better than I was. But what could I do now? It was 2 hours before the concert and I quickly ran to Mark's house. I knocked, but no one answered for a long time. Finally, Mark appeared in the doorway. He stared at me in surprise. "What are you doing here?" I grabbed his arm and pulled him along. "The concert is today and you have to perform in my place." But Mark resisted and would not go. Then I blurted out, "I'm sorry. I didn't know this concert was so important to you." And yet, in a fair fight, you still won. An hour later, Mark and I were standing backstage, waiting for my turn to come out. Mark asked me anxiously if I was sure I didn't want to. I nodded and silently pushed Mark onto the stage. I watched from the backstage. Mark played beautifully, as if he had been preparing for his performance all his life. When he finished, the audience erupted in applause. He was immediately offered a place at the academy. Something inside me skipped a beat. I'd wanted to go to the academy for so long, but Mark deserved it. And then someone called out to me. It was our music teacher. He came closer and modestly handed me a piece of paper. "What is it?" I looked closely. It was an invitation to study at the academy. "But how is this possible?" The teacher replied that he always considered me his best student, so he asked for places in the academy for the two of us. Tears of joy filled my eyes. Now I was going to the academy along with Mark. I couldn't believe it. I kept trying to come up with some insidious plans, and it turned out that the main thing was to always remain human. And life would put everything in its place. I looked at Mark and suggested we celebrate our victory with something sweet. But no peanuts. He smiled back at me. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.